Hey everyone, I hope you enjoy this. If you do, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a great time watching. I've been married to Jennifer for 8 years. We met in college when I was studying accounting and she was earning her culinary arts degree. I remember being captivated by her energy. She always lit up a room. We were that couple everyone thought was solid, the kind of duo who seemed like they had it all figured out. At least, that's what I thought. The first time I felt something was off was about 6 months ago. Jen started working long hours. She's a head chef at a fancy restaurant downtown, and her schedule has always been unpredictable, but this was different. She'd come home later and later, often smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh it off, claiming the restaurant owner, Rick, was a stickler for cleanliness and they'd been testing new guest experience enhancements. Honestly, it seemed legit at the time. Jen has always been ambitious about her career, but then her phone habits changed. Jen's phone was practically glued to her hand, even late at night. I couldn't help but notice the sly smiles she'd give her screen. If I asked her about it, she'd shrug and say it was a group chat with her kitchen staff. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? We'd built a life together. This couldn't just crumble over some texts. Things really started feeling off when she casually mentioned Rick more often. He'd always been just the boss, but now he was Rick this and Rick that. She'd talk about how he was investing in the restaurant, how much he appreciated her input, how they were brainstorming new ideas together. At first, I was proud of her. She was clearly making waves at work. But something in the way she said his name nagged at me. To be continued. A couple of weeks after I first noticed her odd behavior, Jennifer came home with a new wardrobe. And I'm not talking about a couple of cute tops from Target. This was high-end stuff. Designer dresses, expensive heels, jewelry that sparkled like something from a celebrity gala. When I asked about it, she brushed it off with an enthusiastic, "It's for work events. Rick wants me to look the part when I'm representing the restaurant." Okay, that made sense. Rick's reputation as a perfectionist and a showman was well known. But then there was the car. She rolled into the driveway one night in a sleek black Mercedes. I didn't even recognize it at first because our old Honda was parked at the curb. When I asked her whose car it was, she casually said, "Oh, Rick let me borrow it for an event tomorrow. My car's too beat up for valet." She laughed like it was no big deal and tossed me the keys, telling me to check out how smooth it drove. That little voice in the back of my head started to speak up again, but I shoved it down. Maybe this was just the price of being married to someone in a high-stakes job. But a Mercedes? For a chef? That was a level of luxury that didn't quite match up with late nights and greasy aprons. Then there was the phone call. Late one Friday night, she stepped out onto the porch to take it. Normally, she'd answer in front of me, but this time she muttered something about a supplier issue and hurried outside. I could see her pacing through the living room window, her voice low but animated. She didn't come back inside for almost an hour, and when she did, she was all smiles, like nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe the long hours and stress were getting to her. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I decided to brush it off for now. What kind of guy accuses his wife of something shady because she's working hard? I wanted to believe in her. I wanted to trust her. But once you start noticing cracks, it's impossible to unsee them. Her work stories became inconsistent. One night, she'd talk about an exhausting dinner rush and how the sous chef quit mid-shift. The next, she'd say it was a quiet night where the kitchen staff had time to experiment with recipes. I'd call her out jokingly, "Wait, didn't you say it was a madhouse last night?" She'd laugh nervously and say, "Oh, I must have been thinking of another night." Everything blends together when you're working so much. Then, there were the nights she didn't come home at all. "Emergency at the restaurant," she'd text. "Rick needs everyone on deck to prep for a last-minute VIP event. Don't wait up." The first time it happened, I believed her. The second time, I raised an eyebrow. By the third, my gut was tying itself in knots. I tried to casually ask, "What kind of VIP event keeps you there all night?" She waved it off, saying it was for a wealthy investor who could help the restaurant expand into a second location. "Rick is counting on me," she'd said, giving me her best. I'm doing this for us, look. And yet, something didn't sit right. I knew Jen was talented, but since when was she this indispensable to Rick? I started noticing how her demeanor shifted. She was more irritable, snapping at me over the smallest things. If I forgot to take out the trash, she'd act like I ruined her week. When I asked if she was okay or needed a break, she'd glare at me and accuse me of not supporting her career. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I got a call from one of her coworkers, Katie. We'd met a few times at restaurant events, and she seemed nice. Hey, just checking in, she said. Is Jennifer okay? I haven't seen her around much lately. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? She's been working late at the restaurant almost every night. There was a long pause. Oh, well, maybe I'm just missing her shifts. Forget I said anything. Katie quickly hung up before I could ask more questions. Something was definitely wrong. The moment that truly rattled me came one Saturday afternoon. Jen was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't planning to snoop. I really wasn't. But when the name Rick flashed across the screen along with a winking emoji, my curiosity got the best of me. I opened the message. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. Face-blowing kiss. My stomach dropped. I could feel my hands shaking as I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over. What exactly had been unforgettable? A recipe? A wine pairing? I knew better than to kid myself. I stood there frozen until I heard the water shut off upstairs. Panic kicked in, and I locked her phone, putting it back exactly where it had been. I leaned against the counter, trying to act casual, but my mind was racing. When Jen came downstairs, towel drying her hair and humming to herself, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. She kissed my cheek on her way to the fridge and smiled. What's for lunch? How could she act so normal? Was she just that good at lying? Or had she convinced herself there was nothing wrong with what she was doing? I didn't know whether to confront her right there or gather more evidence. I decided on the latter. If I was going to bring this up, I needed to be absolutely sure I wasn't overreacting. From that point on, I started paying closer attention. I checked our shared bank account for unusual charges. There were plenty. High-end restaurants I'd never been to, pricey wine stores, and boutique hotels downtown. I started watching her more closely, noticing the way her face lit up when her phone buzzed, the way she always made excuses to leave the room to answer calls. She thought she was slick, but the cracks were starting to show. The woman I thought I knew like the back of my hand suddenly felt like a stranger. I had to know the truth. The breaking point came a few days later. Jennifer was getting ready for work, slipping into one of her new designer dresses, when I decided I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. Hey, Jen, I started, trying to keep my tone light even though my heart was pounding. You've been working a lot with Rick lately, huh? She paused, giving me a curious look in the mirror as she adjusted her earrings. Yeah, he's really been pushing to expand the restaurant's profile. It's been exhausting, honestly. Exhausting or unforgettable? The words slipped out before I could stop myself. Her hand froze mid-adjustment, and her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged, leaning casually against the doorframe, even though I felt like I might explode. I just noticed how close you two seem. The late nights, the fancy dinners, the texts. Jen turned to face me, her expression morphing from surprise to annoyance. Oh my gosh, are you serious right now? You're jealous of Rick? It's not about jealousy, I said, my voice rising. It's about respect. You've been acting secretive, spending time with him outside of work, and now I'm supposed to believe it's all just business. She laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that set my teeth on edge. You're being ridiculous, Kevin. Rick is my boss. Of course I spend time with him. That's how this industry works. Maybe if you understood what it's like to have a demanding career, you wouldn't be so paranoid. That hit a nerve. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. Demanding career or not, no boss sends flirty texts to their employee. I saw the message, Jen. Last night was unforgettable. Care to explain that? Her face paled for a moment, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms and glaring at me. You went through my phone? Wow, Kevin. I didn't realize you were the type to violate my privacy. That's seriously messed up. I need to go through your phone. I shot back. It popped up while I was standing there. What was I supposed to do? Ignore it? Her defensive posture wavered, but instead of coming clean, she doubled down. Rick and I were brainstorming marketing ideas over dinner. That's all. The text was just his weird way of saying he liked my input. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Her explanation was weak, and we both knew it. But I didn't press further, at least not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd take her lies. As she grabbed her bag and stormed out the door, muttering something about how ridiculous I was being, I realized this wasn't just about her and Rick anymore. It was about figuring out who Jennifer really was, and whether I wanted to stay married to her once I found out. After that fight, Jennifer acted like nothing had happened. She went about her routine, smiling, laughing, and texting like she didn't have a care in the world. But her carefree demeanor only made me more suspicious. If she thought I was going to let this slide, she was wrong. That week, I started doing some digging. The first thing I did was pull her phone records. It was surprisingly easy. Our phone plan is shared, so I had access to all the details. Sure enough, there were dozens of calls and texts to Rick, at all hours. The next step was following her. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't about to sit at home playing detective while she paraded around with her boss. One Friday evening, she said she was heading out to check on a catering event. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed at a distance. She didn't go to the catering venue. Instead, she drove to a boutique hotel downtown, the same one I'd seen pop up on our bank statements. She parked in the valet, stepped out in a dress I'd never seen before, and walked into the lobby. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I parked a block away and waited. Minutes later, Rick walked into the hotel. He was easy to spot, slick suit, over-the-top cologne, and the self-satisfied smirk of someone who thought they were untouchable. I stayed in my car for almost an hour, trying to process what I'd just seen. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Was I jumping to conclusions? Should I storm in there and demand answers? Or should I wait and gather more evidence? I decided on the latter. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof, before I confronted Jennifer again. I went home, opened my laptop, and started combing through every detail I could find. Bank statements, credit card charges, even her social media activity. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater. The more I looked, the more I found. Late-night dinners charged to the restaurant's account. Mysterious payments to a private travel agency. And then there was the kicker, a receipt for a diamond bracelet. The purchase was made at a jewelry store I'd never stepped foot in, and it sure as hell wasn't on her wrist. By the time I closed my laptop, my suspicions weren't just suspicions anymore. They were facts. Jennifer wasn't just cheating. She was living a whole separate life. And now, I was determined to figure out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of anger and determination. Jennifer was already gone, claiming she had to prep for a major event at the restaurant. Her casual tone only fueled my resolve. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. I decided it was time to get some outside help. I reached out to a friend of mine, Mike, who worked in cybersecurity. I didn't tell him everything, just that I suspected Jennifer was hiding something. He was hesitant at first. This wasn't exactly his usual line of work. But eventually, he agreed to help me dig deeper. Within a day, Mike had cracked into Jennifer's email and synced her cloud storage. What he found made my blood run cold. There were emails between her and Rick dating back over a year. At first, they were professional discussions about work, upcoming events, and menu ideas. But soon the tone shifted. "I can't stop thinking about you," one email from Rick read. "You're incredible, Jen. I've never met anyone like you." Her replies weren't much better. "You make me feel alive again," she wrote in one. "I don't know where this is going, but I can't imagine my life without you in it." That wasn't the worst part, though. Buried among the emails was a scanned document, an agreement to transfer partial ownership of the restaurant to Jennifer. The title read, Co-Ownership Proposal. My jaw dropped as I read through it. Rick wasn't just her boss. He was grooming her to become his partner, both in business and apparently in life. The document outlined a plan to make her a 30% co-owner of the restaurant, contingent on continued mutual trust and discretion. It all started to click. The fancy clothes, the hotel receipts, the endless hours at work. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was positioning herself for a massive promotion, one that came with a price. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of fury and disbelief. Was this all just business to her? Did she even care about what we'd built together? For the rest of the day, I couldn't think straight. Every memory of our marriage felt tainted. Every promise she'd made a lie. But I wasn't about to let her or Rick get away with this. If she thought she could manipulate her way into a new life while leaving me in the dark, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. That evening, I waited for Jennifer to come home. The hours dragged as I sat at the kitchen table, the emails and co-ownership document printed out in front of me. This wasn't going to be like the last confrontation where she deflected and laughed me off. This time, I had proof. When she walked through the door, she looked tired but upbeat, humming a tune as she set her bag down. "Hey," she said, giving me a quick glance before heading toward the fridge. "Jen, we need to talk." My voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. She stopped, turned, and gave me a cautious look. "What's this about now?" I gestured to the papers on the table. "This is about Rick, about your late nights, about the lies, and about how you've been selling me out for a shot at co-owning the restaurant." Her face froze mid-smile, her eyes darting to the papers. For a second, I saw a panic flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "What are you even talking about, Kevin? You're sounding paranoid again." I stood up, shoving the co-ownership document toward her. "Explain this. Explain the late-night meetings, the hotels, and the bracelet. Don't you dare tell me it's all business." Jennifer's jaw tightened, and she grabbed the papers, flipping through them quickly. "You went through my private stuff?" she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't turn this on me," I shot back. "You're the one lying and sneaking around." "What is this, Jen? Was our marriage just a stepping stone to your new career?" She slammed the papers down on the table, her eyes blazing. "I don't owe you an explanation for my career moves. You've been checked out for years, Kevin. All you care about is work, bills, and keeping things comfortable. Rick believes in me. He sees my potential." "Sees your potential?" I said, laughing bitterly. "That's what we're calling cheating now? Business mentorship? You're sleeping with him, aren't you?" Her silence said it all. I clenched my fist, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you even feel guilty? Do you even care about what this is doing to me? To us?" Jennifer's expression hardened. "Don't act like you're some saint, Kevin. You ignored me for years. You never once asked what I wanted, what I needed. Rick listens to me. He values me in a way you never did. That's your excuse?" I yelled. "You think betrayal is justified because I was busy providing for us? Unbelievable." She crossed her arms, defiant. "This was never about you. This is about me finally doing something for myself. I'm not going to apologize for that." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the affair, it was the coldness, the entitlement. I realized then that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person I'd fallen in love with. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "Fine," I said quietly. "You've made your choice. But you better believe I'm not going down quietly. You think Rick is your ticket to a better life? Let's see how he feels when I blow this all wide open." Jennifer's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw fear. "Kevin, don't." But I was already walking out of the room. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After our confrontation, Jennifer stormed out of the house. I wasn't sure where she went, but I wasn't about to chase her. Instead, I sat down and started plotting my next move. I didn't just want to confront Rick. I wanted to expose him and Jennifer for what they were. The emails, the co-ownership deal, the late-night meetings, it all painted a damning picture, but I needed more. I needed something so irrefutable that neither of them could weasel their way out of it. The first step was calling Mike again. I told him I needed more surveillance. "Can you tap into her phone without her knowing?" I asked. Mike hesitated. "Kevin, this is getting into some serious gray areas legally." "I don't care," I snapped. "She's already crossed every boundary in our marriage. I'm not letting her walk away from this clean." Reluctantly, he agreed. By the next day, I had access to Jennifer's texts and call logs in real time. What I found made my blood boil all over again. Rick wasn't just her boss or her lover. He was also plotting to help her financially separate herself from me. They were discussing bank accounts, legal loopholes, and how to frame it as me being unsupportive in court. In one message, Rick wrote, "Once the paperwork is finalized, He'll have no claim to the restaurant or anything else. We just need to keep this under the radar for a little while longer. Under the radar? Too late for that, buddy. Next, I hired a private investigator. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny. I needed someone to tail them, document their meetings, and provide indisputable proof of their relationship. The investigator wasted no time. Within a few days, he had photos of Jennifer and Rick kissing in the parking lot of the restaurant, entering the boutique hotel together, and even holding hands during a late-night stroll downtown. The final nail in the coffin came when the investigator recorded a conversation between them in the hotel lobby. Rick was openly bragging about how he planned to make Jennifer the restaurant's co-owner. "It's going to be great," he said, his voice smug. "With you by my side, we'll make the place a Michelin star contender. And don't worry about Kevin. He's clueless." Oh, I wasn't clueless anymore. With everything in hand, the photos, the texts, the emails, and the recordings, I started preparing for what came next. This wasn't just about confronting them anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, protecting myself legally, and ensuring they didn't get away with their betrayal. I didn't know how Jennifer would react when she realized I was one step ahead of her, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Once I had everything I needed, I decided it was time to act. I didn't want to confront them separately. I wanted them both in the same room, forced to face the reality of their lies together. It wasn't about theatrics, okay, maybe a little. It was about ensuring there was no way for them to deny what they'd done. The perfect opportunity presented itself when Jennifer told me she'd be working late at the restaurant that Friday. It was their team-building night, or at least that's what she called it. I'd already confirmed through her text with Rick that this was a thinly veiled excuse for them to spend time together after hours. I called the private investigator and told him to meet me outside the restaurant at 9 p.m. Armed with a folder of evidence and my phone to record everything, I felt a mix of anger and adrenaline coursing through me. When I arrived, the lights inside the restaurant were dim, but it was clear someone was still there. Rick's car was parked out front, and I spotted Jennifer's purse sitting on the hostess stand through the glass door. My PI hung back as I walked up to the entrance and pushed the door open. Inside, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Their voices carried through the quiet dining area. Rick's deep and cocky, Jennifer's light and flirty. My stomach churned, but I kept my focus. "Rick!" "Jennifer!" I called out, my voice echoing through the space. The laughter stopped abruptly. Moments later, Rick appeared, wearing his signature smirk. Jennifer followed, her expression shifting from surprise to alarm as soon as she saw me. "Kevin," she said, forcing a nervous smile. "What are you doing here?" I held up the folder. "Just thought I'd stop by to discuss your business ventures. You know, the ones that involve late-night meetings, boutique hotels, and co-ownership deals." Rick's smirk faltered, and Jennifer's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to sound indignant, but failing miserably. I opened the folder and tossed the photos onto the nearest table. "Care to explain these? Or should I just skip ahead to the emails and texts?" Rick's eyes darted to the photos, his face hardening. "This is private," he snapped. "You had no right to invade our personal lives." "Personal lives?" I scoffed, stepping closer. "You mean the personal lives you built on lies? The ones where you're conspiring to cut me out of everything while playing house together?" Jennifer looked like she might faint. "Kevin, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, my voice ice cold. "You've had plenty of chances to explain, and all you've done is lie. I've got enough evidence here to ruin you both. So, start talking." Rick stepped in front of Jennifer, trying to play the protector. "You don't want to do this, Kevin. Think about what this will do to your reputation." I laughed bitterly. "My reputation? Oh, Rick, I'm not the one sneaking around with a married woman or bribing her with a co-ownership deal. You think you're untouchable, but trust me, you're about to learn how wrong you are." Jennifer finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I felt so unappreciated, and Ricky, don't even try to make this about me," I said, cutting her off. "This is about your selfishness and your lies. You could have talked to me, but instead, you chose him. You betrayed me, Jennifer. And now you're going to face the consequences." The tension in the room was suffocating. Rick tried to say something else, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. Save it for the court, I said, turning to leave. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of everything began to sink in. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but I'd taken the first step toward taking back control of my life. The next moves would be decisive, and I was ready for whatever came next. The confrontation at the restaurant left Jennifer and Rick reeling. I could see it in their eyes as I walked out that night. They thought they had everything under control, but their little game had just come crashing down. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of texts from Jennifer. Can we talk? Please. I never wanted it to go this far. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I ignored every single one. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my plan. My first call was to my lawyer, who I'd looped in on everything. I laid out the situation, handing over the evidence the private investigator had collected, along with the texts and emails from Rick and Jennifer. My lawyer, a no-nonsense guy named Greg, assured me we had a strong case. Between the financial manipulation and the affair, you've got them cornered, Greg said. But we need to move quickly before they try to cover their tracks. That same day, I filed for divorce. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but after everything Jennifer had done, there was no coming back from this. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She conspired to undermine our entire life together for her own gain. As expected, the divorce filing hit Jennifer like a freight train. She showed up at the house that evening, her eyes red from crying. Kevin, please, she begged, standing on the porch. You don't have to do this. We can fix this. I'll end things with Rick. I already told him it's over. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You think this is just about Rick? This is about you. The lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for everything we built together. You didn't just cheat, Jen. You planned to leave me with nothing. She shook her head frantically. I wasn't trying to hurt you, I swear. I was just lost. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. And Rick, he made me feel like I mattered again. Her words might have stung if I still cared, but I'd reached the point where her excuses meant nothing. You mattered to me, Jen, I said, my voice steady. But you threw it all away. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences. I closed the door in her face, ignoring her muffled sobs as she finally walked away. The fallout wasn't limited to Jennifer, though. Rick was about to feel the full weight of his actions, too. My lawyer contacted the restaurant's board of directors, forwarding them copies of the co-ownership proposal and the incriminating evidence of his affair with Jennifer. The board didn't take kindly to their head chef and managing partner conducting a personal and professional scandal under their noses. Within days, Rick was suspended pending a formal review. Word spread quickly in the tight-knit restaurant industry, and his reputation, once pristine, began to crumble. As for Jennifer, she moved in with a friend temporarily. She texted me a few times after that, pleading for another chance, but I didn't respond. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The pieces of my life were still scattered, but I was determined to rebuild. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I finally put myself first. With Rick's suspension and the divorce papers filed, the fallout was starting to spread beyond just Jennifer and me. It turned into something much bigger, a public scandal. I hadn't intended for the whole thing to go viral, but when the private investigators' photos and some of the less damning texts ended up in the hands of a local food blogger, things snowballed. The blog post was titled, From Kitchen to Chaos, the scandal-rocking restaurant name, and it detailed everything: Rick's affair, the shady co-ownership deal, and even Jennifer's role in the whole mess. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little satisfied watching them scramble to do damage control. Rick's carefully curated image of a hard-working entrepreneur was obliterated overnight. Angry customers flooded the restaurant's social media pages, accusing him of favoritism, unethical behavior, and worse. Reservations were canceled en masse, and the restaurant's reputation took a massive hit. Jennifer didn't escape unscathed either. Some of her co-workers at the restaurant, people I'd met at company parties, reached out to me privately. Turns out, her colleagues weren't exactly thrilled about her cozying up to Rick. A few had suspected something was going on, but seeing it confirmed in black and white, that made them furious. She used to be someone we looked up to. One of her sous chefs texted me. Now, She's just a sellout who broke every unspoken rule of the industry. I wasn't sure how to feel about the public backlash. Part of me felt vindicated. After all, Jennifer and Rick had brought this on themselves. But another part of me couldn't help feeling a little sorry for her. She was losing everything. Her job, her reputation, her marriage. Still, I reminded myself that she'd made her choices. Choices that had torn apart our life together without a second thought. Rick, on the other hand, showed no signs of remorse. According to a mutual acquaintance, he was still trying to frame himself as the victim. "Kevin's just bitter," he reportedly told someone. "This whole thing is being blown way out of proportion." Blown out of proportion? That comment lit a fire under me. If Rick thought this was bad, he clearly hadn't realized how much worse it could get. I sent Greg, my lawyer, a message that night. "Let's take this to the next level. It's time Rick learns there are consequences." Greg wasted no time. The next day, we filed a formal complaint against Rick with the state's Restaurant Oversight Board. The complaint outlined everything: the unethical behavior, the manipulation of his role as a manager, and his attempts to transfer ownership under questionable circumstances. It wasn't just about punishing him. It was about making sure he couldn't pull this stunt again with someone else. As I sat back and watched the fallout unfold, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my life and making sure that the people who wronged me were held accountable. Rick and Jennifer had built their relationship on lies and deceit, but now the truth was coming out, and there was no hiding from it that Rick's smug arrogance didn't last long. Within days of the complaint reaching the Restaurant Oversight Board, the cracks in his empire began to show. The board launched an investigation into his management practices, and it turned out my case wasn't the only red flag. Several employees came forward with complaints of favoritism, harassment, and unreported financial misconduct. The tipping point came when the restaurant's investors got wind of the scandal. I didn't know this at first, but Rick wasn't the sole owner of the restaurant. He had partners, wealthy ones, who didn't take kindly to their golden goose turning into a PR nightmare. One of Rick's partners, a sharp-tongued businesswoman named Linda, made a public statement. "We hold ourselves to the highest standards of professionalism and integrity. The allegations against Rick do not reflect our values, and we are taking swift action to address the situation." Translation: Rick was toast. A week later, he was officially removed from his position as managing partner. The restaurant's social media pages issued a carefully worded apology, claiming they were moving forward with new leadership. But behind the scenes, I knew Rick's firing was brutal. A friend of mine who works in hospitality said Rick was blacklisted from nearly every upscale restaurant in the area. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal he'd created. Jennifer, of course, wasn't spared from the fallout. Without Rick to shield her, she became the target of much of the staff's frustration. The co-ownership deal? Dead on arrival. The board revoked her promotion before it even became official, citing her unprofessional conduct and her role in the public scandal. I didn't hear this directly from her. She stopped coming around after our last confrontation, but word got back to me through mutual friends. Jennifer was devastated. She'd spent years building her reputation in the industry, and now, no one would touch her with a 10-foot pole. It was a strange feeling seeing both of them crash and burn. On one hand, I felt a grim satisfaction knowing they brought it all on themselves. On the other hand, there was a small part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, that felt pity. For Jennifer, at least. Rick? He could rot for all I cared. The funny thing is, even in the middle of their downfall, they weren't done trying to spin the narrative. I heard through the grapevine that Rick was blaming Jennifer, calling her a distraction and an emotional liability. Jennifer, meanwhile, tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming Rick had pressured her into the affair and manipulated her with promises of power and success. It didn't matter. The damage was done, and their carefully constructed fantasy world was crumbling faster than they could rebuild it. As for me, I was finally starting to feel free. Watching their empire collapse wasn't just cathartic. It was a reminder that actions have consequences. And no matter how slick or untouchable someone thinks they are, the truth always has a way of catching up with them. With Jennifer and Rick's implosion in full swing, I started focusing on my own life again. For months, I'd been consumed by the betrayal, gathering evidence, and orchestrating their downfall. Now, with the chaos behind me, it was time to figure out what came next. The first step was officially moving out of the house we'd shared. It was full of memories, good and bad, and staying there felt like I was holding on to something that no longer existed. I sold the house and moved into a smaller place across town. It wasn't as big or flashy, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, it all represented a fresh start. I also started reconnecting with old friends. During my marriage, I'd let a lot of relationships fall by the wayside, partly because I thought I was too busy and partly because I didn't realize how isolated I'd become. When word got out about what had happened, people reached out, some with sympathy, others with a healthy dose of, "Dude, what the hell?" My best friend, Jake, was particularly blunt about it. "You let her walk all over you for years, man. It's time to focus on yourself for a change." Jake wasn't wrong. I had spent so much time trying to be the perfect husband, working long hours, handling the bills, keeping things stable, that I completely ignored my own needs. Now, for the first time in years, I had the freedom to figure out what made me happy. I threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected: golf, woodworking, even a weekly trivia night at a local bar. It felt strange at first, rediscovering who I was outside of being Jennifer's husband, but it was also liberating. Therapy was another big step. At first, I was skeptical. Talking to a stranger about my problems wasn't exactly my idea of fun. But my therapist helped me unpack the anger, betrayal, and lingering guilt I'd been carrying. She helped me understand that Jennifer's choices were my fault, no matter how much I'd convinced myself otherwise. As the weeks went on, I started to notice small changes. I was sleeping better, laughing more. Even my coworkers commented on how I seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Jennifer, on the other hand, was still trying to piece together her own life. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved in with a friend and was working at a smaller, less prestigious restaurant. Her attempts to reach out to me had dwindled to occasional texts, half-hearted apologies, vague "I miss you" messages, but I never responded. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. But I also wasn't interested in looking back. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. And while I still had moments of doubt and sadness, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally moving forward. Just when I thought the dust had settled, an unexpected twist came out of nowhere. One afternoon, as I was heading back to my car after a therapy session, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Curious, I picked up. "Hello, Kevin, it's Linda." It took me a second to place the name, but then it clicked. Linda, the investor who had ousted Rick from the restaurant. Why was she calling me? "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," she said, her tone professional but warm. "I wanted to reach out because, well, I've been reviewing the fallout from everything, and your name kept coming up. I've heard a lot about you, and I think we need to talk." "About what?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "About the restaurant," she said. "In your future." I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When I walked into the cafe, Linda was already waiting at a corner table, a folder and a tablet in front of her. She stood to greet me, shaking my hand firmly. "Thanks for meeting me," she said. "I'll get straight to the point. The situation with Rick and Jennifer was a disaster, but it exposed some weaknesses in the restaurant's leadership. Weaknesses I'd like to fix, with your help." I blinked, caught completely off guard. "With my help? I'm not in the restaurant business." Linda smiled. "True, but you've proven yourself to be sharp, strategic, and, most importantly, ethical. The way you handled this mess impressed me. You've got the kind of judgment and resolve we need to turn things around." She slid the folder across the table. Inside was a detailed proposal, a consulting position with the restaurant group, helping them navigate the PR fallout and implement new accountability measures. I stared at the papers, still trying to process what was happening. "I'm flattered, but why me?" Linda leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Because you have a unique perspective. You understand what it feels like to be burned by people in positions of power, and you're not afraid to call them out. We need someone who can help us rebuild trust, not just with the public, but with our employees. And I think you're the right person for the job." Part of me wanted to laugh. A few months ago, I was just a guy trying to keep my marriage from falling apart. Now, I was being offered a chance to influence a major business. I didn't give her an answer right away. I needed time to think, to figure out if I was ready to dive into something so new and unexpected. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be exactly what I needed. A chance to rebuild, not just for myself, but for something bigger. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jennifer had wanted power and prestige, and it had blown up in her face. Now here I was, being handed an opportunity to succeed on my own terms. Maybe life had a sense of humor after all. After a few days of careful thought, I called Linda back and accepted the consulting position. It wasn't just about the job. It was about starting a new chapter in my life, one where I was no longer defined by the betrayal I'd endured. The work was challenging, but invigorating. I spent weeks digging into the restaurant's operations, meeting with staff, and helping Linda and the other investors implement new policies to ensure nothing like Rick's reign of unchecked arrogance could happen again. The employees, once skeptical of anyone tied to management, began to warm up to me as they saw I wasn't there to sugarcoat things or play politics. Through it all, I found a strange sense of closure. Being in the restaurant, seeing the place where so much of my pain had unfolded, could have been unbearable. But instead, it felt empowering. I wasn't haunted by what happened anymore. I was taking control of it, reshaping the narrative into something better. Jennifer, meanwhile, had gone silent. The last I heard, she was still working at that small restaurant, keeping her head down and trying to salvage what was left of her career. Part of me wanted to reach out, if only to say I forgave her, but I stopped myself. Forgiveness didn't mean reopening old wounds. I had moved on, and I hoped in time she would too. As for Rick, he disappeared completely. His name became a punchline in industry circles, a cautionary tale about arrogance and greed. Linda joked once that he was probably working as a line cook somewhere far away, though even that seemed too generous for someone like him. In the months that followed, my life started to feel like mine again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I reconnected with friends, explored new hobbies, and even started dating again. It was cautious at first, but with every step forward, I felt the weight of the past lift a little more. One evening, as I sat on the patio of my new place, watching the sunset with a beer in hand, I realized how far I'd come. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It was all still part of my story, but it no longer defined me. If I could offer advice to anyone going through what I did, it would be this. Trust your instincts, gather your strength, and never let someone else's betrayal dictate your worth. Life has a way of surprising you, even when it feels like everything has fallen apart. In the end, I wasn't just a man who was cheated on. I was a man who rebuilt himself, stronger than ever. And that was the most unforgettable part of all.